Welcome guys! Now that we've learned how to install Blender and discovered its interface, it's time to learn how to manipulate objects in Blender. But to do so, we are going to learn first of all how to add and delete objects within the 3D view. Once it's done, we are going to discuss how a 3D environment works. And after that, we'll be able to grab objects. Yes, in Blender, the term will prefer the term grab. And we are going to learn also how to rotate objects and scale them, which are the three basic operations you can do in a 3D environment. And once we've mastered all these skills, we'll be able to make our first project, which is going to be a custom board. So if you're ready, let's jump into it. Now that we've learned how to navigate, it's time to learn how to manipulate objects in Blender. So the first thing we are going to do is learn how to add and delete an object. To delete the monkey, you just press X for delete. X like if you were making a cross on an object. So delete and confirm. To add an object, you just press Shift A for add and select the object you want. You can add a cube like this, delete, Shift A, you can add a sphere. You can add any type of object listed here under mesh. That's all we are going to look at right now. All right, when you add an object in Blender, let's say we add a cube. If you press F6, you will have options to change the object you've just added. F6 allows you to change properties of the last operator you've used. If you use another one, in the meantime, you won't be able to access this window. So let's say we want a 5mm cube and we want to, I don't know, align it to the view. Okay, here we are. The cube has been added and aligned to the view. Okay, you can find the same window under the Tools panel at the bottom left of your screen. Maybe it's a small window, so you just have to move your mouse at the intersection, click and grab to make the window larger. All right. So when you add an object, the cube, you can also change its properties in the N panel under Transform. You can change its location. You can change its rotation. You can change its scale. So I changed all the dimensions at once by clicking and holding the click in one dimension and dragging onto the other dimensions. They will all be selected, and when I type a number, all the fields are updated at once. And you can change the dimensions of the object. So this is a limit of what I've just explained. You can't change all the dimension at once. So let's just Control C, Control V on all the dimensions, okay? And once you're done changing everything, all the properties of this object, do not forget, it's very important to apply all your changes. So for that, I just press Control A for apply and apply everything I've just made. So I've changed the rotation and the scale, apply, and I've changed the location of the object. And everything in this window will be reset to 0 and 1. So that's how you know all your changes have been applied. Later on, you will see that if you don't do that, this may have serious consequences. Okay, let's delete this object. Now that we've learned how to add an object, let's go back to our Suzanne. Suzanne the monkey. Here it is. So of course, you've come to Blender to manipulate objects. So let's learn how to do that. There are 3 basic operations you can do in Blender. You can move an object, you can scale an object, and you can rotate an object. Exactly what is written here. Change its location, change its rotation, and change its scale. All right. So to do that, you have to take into account that you're in a 3D space. So let me show you. If we go into display and add the Z-axis, you can see that there are 3 axes in the 3D view. The X-axis in red, the Y-axis in green, and the blue axis for the Z-axis. So I prepared a little gizmo to show you clearly what I mean. And you have here a little icon which updates with the view to help you orient your view. All right. So let's move Suzanne. To move an object in Blender, you grab it with G for grab. And now if I move Suzanne, I can't control where Suzanne is going to end up. So with the right mouse button, I can cancel the ongoing operation. So let's move Suzanne on the Y-axis. So you click G for grab, Y to constrain Suzanne on the Y-axis, and left click to confirm. And we've moved Suzanne on the Y-axis. Control Z to cancel. Same thing goes for the X-axis. Grab on X. And we've moved Suzanne on the X-axis. Grab on Z. Same thing. Okay. Let's say we want to move Suzanne to a particular value. I want to move Suzanne, let's say 2 centimeters on the Y-axis. So I press G for grab, Y to constrain, and enter 20 millimeters on the Y-axis. And I've moved Suzanne 20 millimeters, so 2 centimeters on the Y-axis. All right. So grab Suzanne on the Z-axis, and you can see that the axis has a direction. So let's say I want to move Suzanne below the ground, 2 centimeters below the ground. So I enter 20, but that's not what I want. I want to move in the other direction. So if I add a minus now, it will update and move Suzanne minus 20 millimeters on the Z-axis. And I press left click. Okay. So grab Z 20 minus, enter, or left click. Good. Now let's say we want to move Suzanne on a plane. Well, let's move into orthographic mode. So there is no perspective anymore. Well, a weird one at least. And let's see what happens when I move Suzanne now. Suzanne is moving, all right, on a plane. Your screen acts as a plane. All right. So if I go into front view and move Suzanne in that view, you will see that Suzanne hasn't moved on the y-axis. It has moved on a plane comprised of the x and z axis. On this plane. All right, let's go back to front view. You see? Okay. So if you want to move Suzanne on a plane comprised of two axes, you just have to remove the axis you don't want it to move to. So if I want to move Suzanne on a plane made of the z and x axis, I press grab, shift Y to remove the y axis, and Suzanne will move on a plane made of the x and z axis. You see? Okay, good. Now, let's say I want to rotate Suzanne. To do so, you can press the R key for rotate. But same thing, you can't really control how you rotate Suzanne, like so. So to constrain it to an axis, you press R and X, and it will rotate around the x-axis. And you can enter a specific value, 45, minus, and here we are. We have a rotated Suzanne. Okay. And the last operation we're going to have a look at is the scale operation. So to scale an object, you press S for scale, drag your mouse to the right or to the left, depending on whether you want to scale your object up or down, like so. Once you're satisfied, you left click to confirm. Let's cancel this with Ctrl Z, and the same thing applies. You may want to scale an object on a plane. Remove one axis from the equation. So let's add a more interesting object for that. We have a cube and we want to scale it on the x and z axis. So let's press S, remove the y-axis with Shift Y, and scale our object. The y dimension will remain unchanged. So Ctrl Z now. Okay, I can scale an object in only one direction, Z for instance, Y, and X, scale on X. Okay. Now let's do something more interesting. Add a Suzanne. Okay, center the view on it and press Ctrl Alt, and Q. And we are now in quad view. There are 4 windows, each with a specific view. The one on the top right corner is the perspective view, the one on the top left corner is the top view, and the one at the bottom left is the front view. So if we move Suzanne in one of those views, it will be constrained on that specific plane. So as you can see, when I move Suzanne in the top right window, Suzanne only moves in one direction in the other windows. So this can be very handy. Control Alt Q. Right. Now let's say we've rotated Suzanne 45 degrees. So Control X 45 minus Enter. And now we want to move Suzanne, but we want to move Suzanne to the direction it is facing. So if I press grab Y, it will move on the Y axis, but not in the direction Suzanne is facing. If I press Y again, now Suzanne is going to move in the direction it's facing. It's called the normal axis. Okay, let's try it again. Grab Y, Y, and move. Okay, so you know pretty much all there is to know about the basic operations in Blender. Okay, you've probably noticed, but there's also a grid in our scene underneath the object. We've customized it in our previous video, and now it's time to use it. So I'm going to delete Suzanne, add a plane, go into top and orthographic view, and now I can use the grid for moving my object. Go at the bottom of the screen, make sure increment is selected, this icon, and if I click G, hold down the control key and move my object, it's going to move by increments of the grid. So I can precisely move it on the grid. Okay, so now that we've learned everything, it's time to do some serious work. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit faster so that you see how Blender works and how efficient it can be. All right, so let's create a new layout as we saw in the previous video. Name it blocking, add a new window at the top right, choose text editor. By scrolling down on the menu, I'm going to find the new button and add the properties, the measurements I took of my project. So I'm going to add the dimensions of the paper I'm going to use with my printer, and I have measured the cells of my board game. So they are 10 centimeters inside. So what we are going to work on now is a scenario for this game. It is called Zombicide, and as you can see, it has a board of 3 cells by 3 cells times 2. So 2 big squares are glued together to make the board. All right, let's do that in Blender. So first I'm going to add my A4 paper. So for that I'm adding a plane with Shift A. In the properties panel that I open with N, I'm going to make this plane the right dimensions, and when I'm satisfied, I press Ctrl A to apply the changes I just made. All right, I just want to use the A4 paper as a reference, so I'm going to go in the properties window just here under the orange cube that stands for the object properties. Under display, in the drop down, I'm going to select wire, and now I will use the A4 paper as a reference. It might be a good time to save the new startup file so that we get exactly that each and every time we open Blender. All right, let's work on our board now, as we saw. As we just saw. So I'm going to add a new plane. All right. So first of all, let's rename the paper. All right. By double clicking in the outliner. Same thing for this one. Let's rename it cell. By double clicking, typing its name and pressing enter. All right. So let's go into top orthographic view. Let's make it the correct size. Okay, Control A to apply everything, and now we can start working on our board. One last thing, here on the same window as before, I'm just going to tick the wire box so that our cell has a little black line around it. All right. Let's go back to the top view, select our cell, move it by holding down the Control key. Remember, make sure it is here at the bottom of your screen set to increment. And now I will duplicate this cell by pressing Shift-D, holding down the Control key and moving it to the right. And left clicking when I'm satisfied. Shift-D again, move it to the right, click. I will select all three cells by clicking one and shift clicking the other ones. Shift-D again to copy them, all of them at once. Shift-D again, copy, paste. Now let's select all the cells by their name. I'm going to go at the bottom of the screen. Under the Select menu, I'm going to choose the first option, which is Select Pattern. Type in, before the asterisk, cell. And when I press Enter, it will have selected all the cells in my scene. All right, so now let's Shift-D everything, Control, and move them to the right. Okay. And that's it. We've created the board for our game. One last detail maybe. Shift-D one cell and move it at the bottom. Okay? And we have exactly the board right here. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a few things. Let me know in the comments below. And I'll see you next week for a video on how to model things in Blender. Now that we've played with cubes, spheres, and so on, maybe it's time to get some things more interesting. I'll see you then. Bye bye.